President Biden is visiting his ancestral home of Ireland in the coming days. He's there to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the peace deal that mostly ended 3 decades of violence. What was that all about? Well, let me try to explain 800 years of history in a few minutes. Some stories are more personal than others. I was born in Belfast in 1974. By that time, the conflict known as the Troubles was either 5 or 6 years old, depending on when exactly you define its start. But the whole messy history of Ireland and Britain goes back hundreds of years. So for now, let's limit ourselves to only the last 223. In 1800, the Acts of Union brought all of Ireland under British control. The Irish naturally rebelled, and there were sporadic uprisings. In 1916, Irish rebels in Dublin launched an insurrection known as the Easter Rising, declaring Ireland a free republic. The rising failed militarily, but the execution of its leaders by the British caused a massive backlash. At the next election 2 years later, the Irish nationalist party Sinn Féin won a landslide victory, and soon a war of independence began. To make a complicated story short, that war was ultimately resolved with the partition of Ireland. 26 counties comprising most of the island would ultimately become an independent republic. The 6 counties in the northeast of the island became Northern Ireland and stayed under British rule. The reason that happened is that in general terms, Protestants in Ireland have tended to identify as British, while Catholics have identified as Irish. And Protestants were concentrated in the northeast. But partition led to more problems. The boundaries of Northern Ireland were drawn to ensure a Protestant majority in perpetuity, but it also included a sizable Catholic minority, and the minority were discriminated against in the decades to come. In the late 1960s, a civil rights movement arose. The quite reasonable demands of that movement led to intensifying strife, which turned deadly. The first killings of the Troubles were by pro-British loyalist groups, and in the decades to come, the conflict would pit those groups and the British Army and the police on one side against armed Irish guerrilla groups on the other. The most prominent of the Irish groups was the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. During the conflict, more than 3,700 people were killed. The vast majority of those killings took place in Northern Ireland itself. In other words, about 3,700 people were killed in an area roughly the same size as Connecticut and with a population about the same size as Nebraska's. The United States can claim real credit as a player in the Irish peace process, however. The administration of President Bill Clinton granted a visa to Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams against the wishes of the British back in 1994.
For 25 years now, the history of Northern Ireland has been written in the blood of its children and their parents. The ceasefire turned the page on that history. It must not be allowed to turn back.
The Adams visit was crucial in securing an IRA ceasefire later that year. The peace talks themselves were chaired by George Mitchell, a former Democratic senator from Maine who at one time had been Senate Majority Leader. The core of the peace deal was the setting up of a devolved power-sharing executive in Belfast with safeguards for the rights of the minority. Progress has been halting since then, but the wide-scale violence of the 1970s, 80s and early 90s has ended. Recently, progress has been endangered once again by Brexit. The specifics of this are hugely complicated, but it revolves really around borders and customs control. The bottom line is that Biden has been emphatic that the Good Friday Agreement must be protected. During his visit, the president is also hoping to get pro-British unionists to go back into the power-sharing executive. Now, that last part might or might not work. But Biden will get the chance to do more than just celebrate his Irish heritage on this trip. He'll be able to mark America's pivotal involvement in a peace process that, whatever its faults, has saved thousands of lives.